Cool. So today we're here with Elf and Dota. You may know them as the guys behind the Forgotten Runes Wizard Cult project, which has slowly been picking up and has pretty much been everywhere in the NFT space. I'm here with Patrick, Pro's producer, who's also my co-host. And yeah, so over to you guys. I think it would be good to kind of start off with like your kind of background. I understand a little bit about your background in terms of gaming and stuff, but I think for the audience, we want to kind of know how you kind of got sucked into this vortex that is, NFTs.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So, let's see. So I'm Dota, and Elf and I have been working together for probably 10 years. So we both have, maybe a little backing up a little bit. We've both been doing NFTs for a while. The NFT standard came out in January of 2018, and I launched on ERC 721 in April of 2018. And then Elf also the last year or two has been producing his like one of ones and really awesome artwork NFTs for the last couple of years, and so that's kind of how our background in the NFT space. But we go back further than that. Back even maybe 10 years, I put up a flyer where I wanted to do iPhone games, and we met and we collaborated. I did the code. Elf did um, the the artwork for it, and we've had some success there, and it's been just like a long and fruitful collaboration since then.
Yeah. Our first foray into gaming was actually pretty freaking successful. The game we made is honestly quite ridiculous, but it was featured on a lot of it was on a lot of television programs. It was on news. It was in the New York Times. So yeah, and then fast forward, what is it? About 10 years later, we we were both interested in cryptocurrency. Um, when I myself discovered NFTs, it was just obviously a perfect match because I'm an artist by day and night. I love crypto. Dota loves crypto, and we decided to do a 10K collectible project.
Yeah, so we've been looking at these collections and decided that we wanted to do it. And we went through a few of other ideas. We went through an earlier idea about doing fishing. There we still some ideas that are interesting there. We had this idea of doing crypto toast. And then if that turns out there actually already was another project called Toasties. And it wasn't that strong of an idea for us anyway. We were like, oh, this would be fun, but it didn't sort of have that kind of spark. And so then when Elf suggested Wizards, um, it just felt so right.
Yeah, I think that the reason we liked the toast is literally all because I said, okay, you come to the website, there's a toaster, you put the toast in, and an NFT pops out, and like we just thought that was so fun. Um, but then we were like, yeah, there's not much you can do with toast beyond that, and so I suggested Wizards just because there's just so much rich content you can build around Wizards and the whole fantasy genre. Um, Plus, like cryptocurrency is magic internet money, so there's the whole magical element involved in Wizards, and it just seemed like a perfect fit. Plus, I'm just a huge fantasy nerd. I'm a big Tolkien fan. Um, I've ever since I was a teenager, I've loved fantasy. I love Final Fantasy, the video game. Other RPGs. It's an area that I've been swimming in all my life.
Yeah, and I grew up playing, Final Fantasy and Heroes of Might and Magic, and I still play Magic the Gathering with my kids. And um, and one of the things that, I mean, maybe we'll get into this more. One of the things that we find with these stories is that you become really attached to certain characters. And you grow up loving Aragorn, and you sort of think of yourself him, or you play like Legend of Zelda, Link to the Past, and you sort of, I remember as a kid, I would play in my backyard as Link, like, and I would like make my own little potions, and I'd use a stick as a sword, and like I was Link. And sort of as you grow up, you kind of realize that like everyone else felt that they were Link, and you realize that you didn't necessarily have individual ownership over Link. You felt one way about Link, but Link didn't really like know you or care about you. And so I think one of the things that we found that was a really like something special in Wizards was this opportunity that like you can grow up with your character, but like you can also own that character uniquely as your own and also contribute to its story. I mean, we'll talk a lot more about this as we feel like that's maybe one of the core ideas about Wizards.
Interesting. And when did you decide? Because I know project timelines are a huge thing because there was a a quote unquote bear market as well recently. How long have you guys actually been planning this actual wizard project?
You know, again, we have been working together on creative projects for 10 years. So I could say, oh, we decided Wizards in, let's say, February or March. I don't know exactly, right? But like if we had just met in March, there's no way we would have executed in a couple of months, because we're drawing on that history of like the back and forth,
Yeah.
the arguments. Like, we'll get into fist fights over whether or not the pixelated beer should have like bubbles on top of it. We'll be like yelling matches or whatever. And then like we like make a decision and we like resolve it and then kind of move on. And so like if you don't kind of have that history of like respect and like the creative process and the way to like a
Yeah.
workflow, yes, maybe it only took us 2 or 3 months to do Wizards. It actually took us like 10 years to get here.
No, totally understand. Totally understand.
So, in terms of kind of coming to an agreement of how you wanted to implement the wizards and sort of spawn them into this world, how did you guys sort of find? I know you mentioned this before on the Wizard Wednesdays, how there was a number of sort of iterations of the wizards. This isn't the first 10,000 wizards. How did you sort of come to an agreement there in terms of what that actually looks like for the contract and the wizards themselves?
Oh, there's at least two parts, maybe three. There's like the Wizard Collection. Yeah, there's the Wizard Collection. There's like the contract for the wizards, and then there's like the minting process.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So, yeah, there's so many different things to say about it. One thing I would say is like, unlike most other NFT projects where it sort of just looks like there's one character and that one character is just dressed up in cosmetics in 10,000 different ways. We actually have at least 140 unique heads. So there's at least 140 unique characters, but then obviously when you combine them in different combinations, there's a full 10,000. So that's like the first thing that sort of I wanted to do with this is really make it feel like a whole cast of totally unique and different characters. Um, Another thing that separates us and what makes our characters so unique is they all have individual names. Other NFT projects merely have a serial number. We crafted an entire naming system so that each wizard has its own identity, its own name. Um, it's funny because we were just talking to a reporter earlier this morning, and she was talking about Beanie Babies. And one thing that made the Beanie Babies so special is they all had unique names, and so that sort of like put like a mini story behind each Beanie Baby, just giving it a name. And while I was not thinking about Beanie Babies when I made these wizards, I think like this naming concept is one thing that's super valuable about them. There's also a lot of narrative that is built into the collection already. This narrative sort of reveals itself through the names, through the different heads, through the names of like the familiars, the spells, the items. They all have unique names. And when you combine those into each wizard character, it sort of evokes a bigger story. And to take it one step even further, Dota came up with this brilliant concept called affinity. And I'll let Dota talk about it, but just if I could just briefly touch on it, it's this feature within our generator that basically allows or makes all the parts seem way more coherent, rather than if the generator had just randomly put them all together. The generator had direction. The generator had an aesthetic, I guess, leniency towards it. It was not just random. It was actually, there was a lot of control in the generator, the way it put our wizards together. But Dota, do you want to speak more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So with these collections, you're not creating 10,000 unique pieces of art. You kind of assemble them with traits. And so the Forgotten Runes collection is about 350 parts if you kind of deconstruct it that way. And the thing is that let's say it's 150 heads and whatever, maybe so many bodies and so many familiars and runes and backgrounds and all this. If you just shuffle them randomly, you just say, put a random head on a random body, like pretty much almost all other 10K projects do, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Random is not that interesting. It's just sometimes you maybe have things that fit together, but in most cases you don't, because the space is so large that you don't really get this cohesiveness. And so what we found we had is like, we developed these like really rich, interesting, like coherent characters. And when we just multiplied the parts times randomness, we didn't love it. And so we were trying to think about like, okay, how can we kind of solve this issue? And so what we were able to do, without getting too technical, I mean, I'm happy to talk about the details, but there's algorithms and there's ways that you can do this by saying like, okay, what if we attach ideas to each of these parts, right? You look at a particular head. This character, he has a big bushy beard and a big nose, and he's got leaves in his hair. Where is he going to live, right? Is he going to live, maybe he lives in the mountains, maybe he lives in the forest, but you wouldn't initially say that he's living in the desert or even by the beach, right? And so we might assign this as like, woodsy or like rough to this character. And similarly with his clothes or with his staff, right? He's going to hold like a woodsy character is going to have a wooden staff, and he's going to have these like sort of earth tone clothes, and he's going to have, maybe a rabbit familiar, this sort of thing. And so we would kind of assign this, let's call it feeling or aesthetic to a particular wizard before we even generate it and said, this is going to be a woodsy wizard. And so when you, the algorithm, are assembling, make sure you include ideas that match woodsy, right? And you can do the same thing with like green magic, blue magic, an ocean feel, right? Maybe you're going to have a lighter like linen shirt, or this is a darker character, right? He's going to have a crow and a black tunic and, a goat's head or something.
And on your website, you mentioned, I think, what you're describing is called the affinity system. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So yeah, I mean, because when doing a deep dive of your project, that's what really struck me was not only the actual depth, and you mentioned earlier that you really love wizards. You're a huge fantasy nerd, and you have this whole sort of culture behind it that you're trying to weave into this project. And I think the whole wizard aspect is very, it's overlooked. Even given each wizard a name, I think it's it shows that level of care and detail that you would on something that you'd be proud to put your name on. So I mean, like, going a bit further in terms of the affinity system, how would that kind of like work on a is that done on chain or is that done on the back end when you're actually generating the wizards? I think a bit more detail about that would definitely be quite enlightening.
Yeah, absolutely. So, okay, in the crypto community, there is a big emphasis on sort of fairness and this idea of like randomness, right? Many projects sort of say we want like provable randomness on chain. That makes sense if you don't trust the NFT creators. One, you think they might cheat and give the best ones to their friends. And two, if you are really valuing this idea of like pure randomness. You want the computer to decide in this like provably fair way. There are a lot of projects for which that's their goal, and that's like what they want to do. And they want to be like, look, guys, you don't know us. We promise we're being fair. We let, Chainlink, verifiable random function, generate the randomness for each one of the items in our collection. You know that nobody gets an advantage. That makes sense if people want to do that, of course. But for Wizards, like we wanted to, we only get 10,000 wizards, and the possible combinations, because of how many traits we have, which is higher than most, was somewhere around, I don't know the exact number, let's say 600,000, right? There's like way more possible wizards that could have been created than were created. And we wanted to make sure, that we loved the collection when it was done. And so, I mean, I guess to answer your question, is this sort of affinity generator is off chain. We generated the entire collection beforehand, off chain. It's not provably random in that sense. We have certain wizards which we hand created, right? You have, as you look deeper into the lore of the collection, we have certain wizards at certain important like numerology. And so it wasn't like provably random in that case, but that's because we created this with a sense of like bringing these characters into the world, right? Like you don't need J.K. Rowling to roll the dice depending on what character she brings in. She like has a design, and so that's what we have. That said, we do have all of something that you did allude to is all of the Forgotten Runes, the pixels of the image, as well as the attributes, as well as the names, can all be recreated completely from on-chain data. So for as long as the Ethereum blockchain exists, the Forgotten Runes wizards will exist. So unlike many other projects where the image is stored on IPFS, IPFS is decent because you can at least verify if someone has the image, you can verify that it's cryptographically correct. Like you can verify that if someone claims to have the entire like Punks collection, that it's the right image. But for a lot of these projects, they haven't actually stored the pixels. If it becomes lost, you couldn't recreate those images from the on-chain data. Whereas with Wizards, you can. So there are some projects doing this more, like Art Blocks, and for example. But
Wizards live forever.
Yeah, Wizards live forever, and their stories will be told for 100 years.
And I think so. That was a pretty heavy design choice, and I think it would be I want to get your opinion as to why you think that would be that's important, rather than just putting it on IPFS or
Oh, yeah. Oh, because I think that like this idea of kind of, sure, I'll double down on that. So the question, as I understand it, is why is storing the collection on chain is a heavy design choice, and it's like technically challenging. Why was that important? And the reason is just around this idea of longevity. So let's take Bored Apes, for example. They're leading the pack in many ways. However, if, for example, the way IPFS works, where the images are stored, is it's not very much different than any other kind of website, where like we all remember kind of like the weird Tumblrs that we used to visit, or like GeoCities pages or your MySpace page or whatever, and those things have just kind of disappeared from the internet. Or even if you can find it on Wayback Machine, the images are sort of just gone. They're gone. They're lost to history. You can't really find them. And so that's really kind of the future facing most IPFS based projects, is someday some people won't be paying as much attention to them. And the way the IPFS system works is if no one claims and pays for storage for those images, they disappear. They actually purge.
Imagine all the MySpace music we've lost.
Exactly. So like, yes, of course, everyone's paying attention to Bored Apes now. They have established themselves probably such that like there is always someone who's going to download the collection. That's fine as long as you can get a hold of them. You'll be able to recreate it. Like the practical risk with, let's say, something as big as Apes is probably not that big of a deal. But for the smaller projects, it's for sure a risk for you as a collector, because even if you maybe downloaded the image from your particular NFT, if the whole collection doesn't exist, that's like that's going to affect the value of your NFT by association. So what was really important to us is we want wizards to live forever. How? Well, we put that on chain. Maybe there's a day where someone doesn't hold a copy of the Ethereum blockchain, but it's all or nothing. If Ethereum still exists, the wizards will still exist. Every bit about recreating the NFTs exists in on-chain transaction data.
It's sort of the spirit of crypto, isn't it? It's crypto is immutable, crypto is forever, crypto is uncensorable, unhackable. It lasts forever. So we wanted the wizards to reflect that, and that's technically why we wanted to do it, but also it fits with the theme. Wizards are sort of immortal beings, so naturally they would have to live forever on whatever sort of magical substrate is available. That magical substrate is the Ethereum blockchain.
Just to expand on sort of what you've put in the contract and sort of how that's going to lead to the stories you want to tell. I know last night again on your weekly spaces there, you started dropping a little bit of the lore around the wizards there. I'm guessing there's more stories that you guys have to tell that are sort of already waiting in the contract just to be teased out there. Can you expand on that a little bit in terms of like what you've done to seed that and like make it so that the community sort of is part of revealing that story?
Yeah. So so a lot of the meta narrative, the lore under Forgotten Runes is written. It's sitting on my computer. We are, part of my mission is to think of the most interesting ways to reveal all of this narrative to the community. Whether that's through me talking about it on Wizard Wednesday, whether it's through a comic, an animation, a video game, whatever. The first thing to know though is that the bulk of the story, the bulk of the narrative is already in the collection, right under your nose. There's a lot of the narrative that's already in the map. Just the geographical locations of certain locate features on the map. Those are put there for story reasons. And so, yeah, I'm sorry. What was the second part of your question?
Sorry, just in terms of like the sort of hints or like breadcrumbs you've put to like make it so that the community can sort of like tease that out.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like I said, a lot of the story is already in the collection. I remember like the first few weeks after we launched, our Discord was frenzied with activity of people digging into the collection and trying to tease out all the secrets, whether it was through numerology, whether it was through the special unique wizards, whether it was through the names. There's all kinds of little Easter eggs in the collection. So that's sort of like, I guess you could say the top down storytelling aspect of it. But just as important is the bottom up decentralized storytelling that's happening every day within our community. It's almost more important. We designed this collection specifically for that. And there's tons of features in the collection that support this idea. So like, just the fact that it's pixel art, that alone is it begs for storytelling. Why? Because pixel art is very minimal in details. It doesn't give you a lot of information. It's just enough information to pique your curiosity. So, that's why I think like those old RPGs on the NES and the Super Nintendo were so engaging, so compelling, because of the pixel art. It just made your imagination fill in all the gaps. So that's one reason one feature of the collection that sort of ignites creativity. Another thing we're doing is we've got this tool called the Book of Lore. And the Book of Lore is going to be an online compendium where any wizard holder can come to it, log in with their MetaMask. MetaMask will read which wizard you own. you'll be able to go to that page and write lore, write poems, put art, animation, anything you want, any sort of lore artifact, you will be able to attach to your wizard permanently. And so the idea is that eventually this book becomes this big, beautiful historical tome that just chronicles the history of every single wizard in the collection. You know, I'm hoping that this book of lore is going to be just an historical artifact in the NFT scene. In 3 years or so, it might just be like one of the most groundbreaking documents in all of crypto. That's my hope anyway. You know, another beautiful thing about the Book of Lore, though, is as lore as meta narrative is being written from the top down, say for like an animated show or a comic, as we're writing that, what we're going to be able to do is, let's say we're going to use wizard number 527 in a scene. Instead of just creating something out of whole cloth, the first stop is the Book of Lore. We'll be able to turn to that page, see what a user has written about it, and potentially add that into like the official animated show in that particular episode. So I'm really keen on this idea of decentralized lore building. You know, I think it's what separates us from every other IP project in history. Like if you compare us to Disney, who it's all totally top down, totally centralized story building. You know, they would, you know, if anybody puts like a meme of Mickey Mouse on the internet or like makes their own Mickey Mouse cartoon on YouTube, they're going to get DMCA'd. Disney is going to do everything they can to hide that. We are taking the exact opposite approach. We are putting that front and center. We are putting that on equal footing as like my own lore creation from the Forgotten Runes, I guess, company or whatever.
Yeah, like I've noticed that you guys are very keen on sort of retweeting and getting out any kind of community created artwork, whether that be animations or stories or poems or anything. Might be one of the easiest way to like bootstrap a Twitter account right now is just make wizard lore.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean that was sort of the whole point from the beginning. I mean, even down to the reason like we chose to do full body avatars instead of just a portrait, which is what most other NFT projects are doing. The full body gives you more of a sense that this is a full character that is ready to travel the world and to have stories written about them. It's not just a simple portrait. It's not just like a shallow vanity project. It's like a full world and a full character with a full life. And just to put a button on that, you know, I think like what's really fascinating about this project is it sort of mirrors the entire spirit of the internet. Because what is the internet? It's the omnibus of all of human culture. The internet is a reflection of the good, the bad, and the ugly of everything of humanity. And one of the driving mechanisms on the internet is the meme. And when I say meme, I don't necessarily just means like the lowbrow image with like text over it. I mean,
yeah, not like just an image macro.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean like the broader definition, which is like taking an element from culture and sharing it from person to person to person. And every time it changes hands, it gets reshaped. You know, that's the sort of meme that I'm talking about. And so these wizards were designed for that entire that spirit, that whole process. You know, I imagine that the Book of Lore is going to be an omnibus of the entire Forgotten Runes culture. And so that, you know, that's what I think is so beautiful about it.
Just before we kind of move on a little bit there, I just wanted to ask you guys, like you're talking about involving the community and getting everybody into creating their own lore. I know you've kind of worked with a few people in terms of either sponsoring or creating art already. Is that something you're like planning to like continue or like continue to even ramp up and do more of that in terms of like sponsoring and so on specifically?
Yep.
Yeah,
I think so. Go for it, Dylan.
absolutely. Yeah. So we kind of see like there's two different roles, right? There's like top down and bottom up. And so for sure we feel that like by doing top down, like say, let's call it lore creation, like even if we do sort of like a professional level show, that's still its own form of lore creation. And then we also want to make sure that people there's basically three things, right? There's like top down that we create. There's sort of like professional artist created or commissions. And then there's also just like the individual wizard holders. And like, I think from the top down, we see a responsibility from our end to create these stories. So we are working to create Forgotten Runes Wizard comics. We are working with one of the best animation studios in LA to do shorts for Wizard, like a Wizard show. We also are working on a Wizard video game. Now, both in the show and the game, no ink has been put to paper yet. We're still in talks. But the idea is that we're creating these like high production value expressions, and we'll draw from the book of lore, as Elf mentioned, but we're providing kind of this structure for these characters to live in. And then, on the other end, you have people who maybe they don't feel that they are like super strong in terms of art or being a storyteller or a songwriter. And I think one thing we want to make sure people understand is that you don't have to be like an amazing artist to contribute to your character's story. That like really whatever you bring, however you feel your character acts or looks or the artwork you want to create is part of our community at all levels. And so we don't want people to feel sort of intimidated out. That's part of the benefit of the pixel art, is that you can open, Asprite and do an animation almost like Minecraft, like regardless of your skill level, you can start to animate those things. And then for the middle tier, people who they really want, maybe that extra bump in quality, we do have a set of folks who do commissions. We actually just created a page on our website. And so this would be people, Brett has done some illustrations. Margaret has done poems. Wise Sam has done pixel art. We've, had Trevor Jones doing 3D models. And so we've got a directory on our website of people that can, if you want to pay them to do art that's outside of maybe your skill level or your interest, we have those too. So we just really see that like the broader point is really that like everyone can come together and to create this universe, right? As Elf said, like Disney will for sure get into the NFT space, right? Like this year, if they haven't already, you'll see like Marvel and Disney and whatever NFTs drop, right? And so, but the thing is they'll do it in such a way that the IP is so legacy. They'll hold on to the rights. They won't give you any rights, right? They'll sell you the NFT, but then they'll send you a DMCA the second you try to create a derivative work. And so, yeah, it'll technically be an ERC 721 or whatever, but it's not the same thing. We really see this as a way that everyone can come together and tell these stories in this like collective legendarium.
Yep.
Awesome. Just moving on, sort of in a sort of tangently there, you did mention the like an animation and a game and so on. With you guys both having worked in game development in the past, what's something you want to see in an NFT sort of based game that wouldn't have been possible in a sort of Web 2.0 game?
Me personally, what I really want to leverage first and foremost is this idea of identity that I think a lot of NFTs give their holders. People become their NFTs. And so I think my first goal with the game is you can be your wizard in the game, and then you can socialize with other wizards within the cult. And, it's the whole like role-playing aspect of it. That to me is like the number one thing, and so we're actually like building things within the game to incentivize that sort of teamwork and that socialization. And so like, for example, like imagine there's a cave and it's really dark and you can't see inside. You're going to have to team up with a wizard who either has a fire spell or a torch to like get into the cave and look around, because they have the light. You may not have a fire spell. And so we want to build all kinds of incentive structures that sort of force you to co-op and team up and socialize. We basically want to bring like the spirit of our Discord into the Forgotten Runes meta.
Yeah. Yeah, and from my perspective, I mean, well, one thing is we might get a chance to do the fishing thing, but
Yeah.
the you know, so we have a dev partner. I don't want to put them on the hook necessarily for any specific features, but let me talk about some of the ideas that we want to like capture. And I think that like the first thing is just around ownership, right? There really aren't that many NFT based games, and like one kind of goal for the Forgotten Runes metaverse is that really everything that you can own, from um, like a wooden wand to a diamond sword, can become an NFT that is like ERC 721, or, you know, maybe it's 1115, whatever, but it's like an NFT standard that can be traded on the open marketplace. That everything that you own, every potion, every scrap of fur, you know, the wood that you use to build your property, all of these things can become NFTs that you can use in all of the regular NFT ways for like marketplaces and these sorts of things. So there aren't very many games that sort of have that level of commitment that even exist at all. I think one of the main things that is sort of most obvious in this kind of metaverse is the idea of private property in terms of the land. We have, for example, the Cobalt Horde has sort of formed from the bottom up, and you can imagine that maybe there's the like Horde House or like the Cobalt, you know, corner or whatever, where they kind of have, you know, whether it's like a frat house or whatever.
It's the Kobold Crossroads.
Yeah, but they've got a building that they tried to build as best they can and clean as best they can, and but it's, you know, it's not a big home, but it's theirs, and so that's those. There's a certain sort of group identity that you get around like group ownership of property, and you can build structures and sort of go to people's houses and you can decorate them, um, and so I think that's a big part of it, is like building locations on property that you own within a space that you socialize with your friends. I think there's sort of maybe the obvious things around like going on quests, killing monsters, maybe having NFTs that result in the like um, conquest of those beasts. And then I think another part that's interesting is around like user generated content, right? We already have folks creating songs and paintings and like artwork, which we'll be adding to the book of lore. But you could imagine a world where some of those things exist in game, where there's ways that you can craft or create or make art that actually exists within the game, and you can imagine having a store of artwork that you've created that you sell within the game. And so I just think there's just endless opportunity for like socialization, commerce, adventure, and friendship within this kind of metaverse.
Back to the art side of things there for you, Elf. I guess you've done all the heads yourself. You've animated all these, and now because you're trying to put these characters into a metaverse compatible, sort of create a metaverse compatible character, we're actually going to get the 4 sides of each head. And I heard you were actually animating those yourself. How is that going?
Oh man, it's crazy. Yeah, it's taking a long time. I quit my day job so I could draw every side of every wizard. Loving every minute of it, honestly. I really do enjoy the work, but it does take a long time. Currently the wizards exist as a 3/4 view static image. So in order for them to walk around in a metaverse in all directions, we need the front, the back, the left side, and the right side of all these wizards. Unfortunately, some of them are asymmetrical, so that I can't just flip the left and right side. I have to actually draw it out. So once we get these wizards turning, that just means they're standing there. We actually have to make them walk. And so now I have to take, with some help, I've actually enlisted some of our generous cult members to help with this, but I have to take the front, the sides, and the back, and then add a 4-frame walk cycle to all those angles. So it's like, I can't even do the math. I'm terrible at math,
Like
but it's
1,700 some images at least.
yes, yeah, it sounds about right. Might as well be a million. But yeah, so it's taking me a while. But I did get some help yesterday. So yeah, it just as soon as we're ready to do this, because yeah, it is one of the most important things is getting these wizards in the metaverse. I think it's just going to be so freaking awesome. So that's taking up the bulk of my time. Usually, I try to do that in the morning and the afternoon, and then at night I do a lot of writing on the metaverse or the meta narrative.
Yeah, because you're actually doing this full time right now, aren't you? You left your job about 2 weeks ago, eh?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, I left a job of 4 years to work on this full time, and best decision I ever made.
I think that that kind of speaks to like a larger theme about quality and like the amount of work put in. I think that might be. I don't know if you guys can kind of expand on what you guys think about this, but everything from sort of the attention of detail to the contract, the animation, what you're doing with um, the walk cycle and everything like that. It speaks to this larger idea of high effort versus low effort, which we're seeing in a lot of projects right now. Um,
Yeah, yeah. I would love for Dota to expand on the beautiful intricacies of his contract, but just for myself, I am a perfectionist to a fault. I always have been. I'm just super anal about my own artwork. If it's got my name on it, I have to have it a certain way, and this is for better or for worse. And so, for example, like we at first hired a really talented pixel artist on Twitter to help me do these turns, and while she did a great job, I I couldn't allow it to happen. I realized I have to do it myself.
you're
Um, and so
too connected now. Like,
yeah, like I no exaggeration, I've almost memorized every pixel on every wizard. I mean, I just I know the decision behind every single pixel, like why I put that pixel there. Um, and this like method is used in all animation studios. You've got like your senior character designer who designs the character, they draw all the angles of the character, and then they pass that down to the junior designers to use those angles to like extrapolate poses and walk cycles and whatnot. So it's not really unusual what we're doing. But yeah, that's how anal I am about this whole thing. Dota, what about your contracts?
Yeah. Um, on the scale of contracts relative to like some of the DeFi projects, the NFT contracts are in most cases a lot simpler. And so you do have that benefit of, um, let's take the contract of, Forgotten Runes versus the contract of, let's say, Malt V1, which are like this like extremely intricate, sophisticated, leading edge effort for like an algo stable. They're not even in the same ballpark in terms of complexity. So we do have an advantage there. One of the things that I think that's important um, for us was we wanted the minting to be at a specific block time. To me, this felt straightforward, but to a lot of people, it wasn't exactly obvious. So one of the things that I've seen with many drops, you see this with ICOs, you see this with NFTs in particular, is that they say, oh, the NFT is going to drop at 12 p.m. Pacific or something. And then what happens is the second the mod to turn it on, they typically Ethereum has the blockchain has no knowledge of the wall clock time, right? The blockchain doesn't know what time it is because the blockchain doesn't consult anything other than itself for truth. If the blockchain had to check outside of itself for what time it was, then the blockchain is depending on that outside entity for the authority of time. So the blockchain actually only moves in block numbers. The blockchain always knows what block number it is, and on Ethereum, the block numbers progress at around a new block every 14 seconds. And so, the way that you do time on chain is not to look at like the human wall clock, but rather to look at the block number. And the good thing about that is it's like very fair. One of the things you'd see that would happen a lot is that they'd say, oh, it's going to launch at 12 noon. And then the second the sort of the founder or the controller goes to enable the sale, they're automatically being like front run by their whole community, because the community is watching their wallet. And then like the second that they try to submit this transaction, the community tries to do, oh, +1 gas, +- gas. It's basically like you're entering a stadium through a single door, and the founder says, hey, everybody, you can only like come into the show after I walk in. And then the whole crowd mobs the person while they're walking in. It's just like people get stepped on. It's just a huge problem. So, well, one of the things that we did that was important, I think, is we said, no, the launch is at a block number. You're not going to know the exact time, but it's fair for everyone. And I think the other thing that's like less about the contract, we could talk more about that. But I think another thing that was really important to us was that the minting process felt special. Like we sat and talked and said, we want this minting to go down in history books. I've like seen mintings for NFTs where they don't even calculate the form doesn't even calculate the price for you. They say, oh, these NFTs are going to be 0.1. So if you want 4 of them, you need to make sure you type in like 0.4 into the form. Like it's like worse than any e-commerce site you've ever seen. Like imagine if Amazon said, oh, when you check out, make sure you add up the value of all the things in your cart and type in that number. Like the minting websites for NFTs are just so lame. And we wanted one for it to feel like slick and special, and 2, we wanted to hide surprises, so that way like after you minted the first one, you were like, that was amazing, I need to see that again, I'm going to go mint more. And so I mean there's videos floating around of it, but we basically said, you show up to the website, we tried to have almost no text on the website. We wanted it to be like all iconography as far as we could push that idea. So you show up to the website, a crow flies in, and there's a MetaMask icon. You click that MetaMask icon, and it asks you how many wizards you want to summon. We do have text, but we wanted to limit it. And there's, you can choose. Do you want to summon 1, 3, or 12 wizards? Just these buttons with like stick figures on it. You summon the wizards, and then there's an earthquake. The lights dim, and then a giant beam of light shoots out of the secret tower. And then like your wizards like are summoned and appeared. And so like we wanted the moment of when you summoned a wizard to be like the most incredible experience that you've ever had minting an NFT. And then you can't replay that, right? You want people to be like, that was amazing. I wasn't recording that. I wasn't expecting that. I need to go back and mint some more. And also you're just like delighted because it was a really fun experience. And so, I don't know. Those are the levels of details. Like that was a one-time event that took us like, probably if it took us 2 months to do the collection, it probably took me a month just to do that website. And those details are important to us because we're trying to tell a story here. We're not just trying to like, sell a trading card.
And like, just from my experience being on the Discord since about mid-July, it's sort of like stuff of legend, right? Like like you said, there's not many videos out there. There's not many people recorded it. It's sort of like stories from the like oldest wizards passed down onto the newest ones.
I love that idea.
Yep. And the secret tower will open again. We have other events planned for it.
To touch on that a little bit, I know there's talk about a burning coming up. Is there anything you can kind of shine some light on what that might mean?
Sure. Yeah. So at its most base level, it's a token burn, but it's much more than that. So it's basically going to be a chance for wizard holders to throw their wizard upon a pyre. It is going to be called the Great Burning. There's going to be some dark magic involved, some very risky dark magic. And if the fates see fit, then you may be rewarded for this sacrifice. You may also regret your decision to burn your wizard. That's kind of the most we can say about it right now, unless Dota, you'd like to add anything.
I wouldn't.
Okay.
The mystery continues. On sort of the same note there, before we move on, I know there's also talk about warriors in the future, in terms of expanding the community down the line. Has any sort of, I know you haven't talked about that much lately. Is there anything new you could speak about that?
Yeah. So here's what I'd like to say. Warriors. It is, it's intended to be a new character drop, but the most important thing to know about the warriors is that there is going to be purpose. There is going to be a very significant reason to drop warriors. It's not just Forgotten Ruins, like just adding another NFT set. There's a very real narrative driven decision behind this. If we've got a metaverse full of wizards, awesome. But every good fantasy genre balances might with magic, swords and sorcery, brains with brawn, wizards and warriors. So, while the wizards will be long established in this metaverse, they will be well learned in the runes. Their wisdom will pervade across the land. We imagine the arrival of the warriors as being sort of let's say, not necessarily cataclysmic event, but certainly a ripple through the zeitgeist, if you will. So, there's room enough in the world for other types of characters. Maybe let's put it that way.
Is there anything you wanted to add there, Dora?
Yeah, no, I just want to I would just echo what Elf's saying. I think he summarized it pretty well. That we want to do warriors, but they need to come in a way that makes sense, both for our community and both for our narrative. I think that, I, for example, would love to create, merfolk from the brine and a set of vampires from the mist, or we'd love to see more like fur gnomes from the wold. And I think in time these characters will come to our world, but it needs to be done in a way that makes sense from all dimensions.
I think that's pretty important, because we're already starting to see some sort of second projects from the same creators, and in my mind, it seems like maybe some of them are coming a little too soon, almost to the detriment of the initial project, where You're sort of watering things down.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the first thing we want to avoid. We will not drop warriors until it's ready. I mean, I just want to underline the fact that there's going to be purpose and a need for these warriors to enter our universe, our metaverse.
And one question that is on my mind. You mentioned earlier that you're going to have a lot of consumer-driven kind of content. In terms of the IP of the Wizards, how much is that under your creative control? And how much will you slowly let out into the the wider universe?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we are still talking with council to make kind of an official legal meat space document about the IP of Forgotten Runes, Wizards and Warriors. So this is all kind of subject to that document finalizing, but the basic idea right now, the idea that what we want to do is we want our wizard holders to be able to have a non-exclusive commercial right to the character in the NFTs that they own. Let me unpack that a little bit. When I say commercial rights, the idea is that you will be able to commercialize make commercial products based on your wizard. And it's not just the image. There are some projects where they say, well, you own, the image that's in your NFT. For us, it goes beyond that. You actually have rights to the character, right? So if you want to create, stuffed animals or like costumes or merch, about your character, even in derivative works, like you have a commercial license to do that. And when we say non-exclusive, part of that is we also want to be able to tell stories with these characters without sort of any friction. Like, let's say that we go to just, we don't have any talks here. I'm just throwing out a name. Say we go to Netflix and we want to do a show. Netflix is not going to come into our Discord and try to negotiate rights for every wizard that ever appears in every episode. It's not that really helpful. So we are still retaining basically the ability to kind of surprise you when you see your wizard in an episode. So I think if you decide to own a wizard, that's maybe, not to use a financial term, but like a bet on Elf and myself being able to use that wizard in a creative way that you don't fully control, but we expect you'll like, some wizards, I don't think that we think any wizards are necessarily evil, but there are certainly wizards who don't obey the golden rule. And so you might own a wizard that acts in a particular way that was maybe, not predicted by you. But that said, we think that that's going to be best for all wizards as a whole. Now, this commercial right, we want it to be big enough so that any of our community members can make significant revenue from it, but have some sort of cap such that, we wouldn't necessarily want a big player stepping in, buying a dozen wizards and doing a wizard show and then cutting out us and cutting out the community. So what we're talking about is something around $1 million cap. That is like, if, and that's per organization. So if you own 10 wizards, you can do commercial works on that up to $1 million in like revenue. And then after that, there'll be some sort of royalty, let's say 20 or 30% that you pay back to us, half of which goes to us, the creators, and half of which will go maybe into a community DAO, something like that. And the idea here is like, if you feel that, maybe you're doing physical merch and 30% is way too high because your margins aren't even that high, that's fine. Like, we'll talk to you about it and work out a deal that makes more sense. The point of that cap is not to prevent those things or to slow them down. It's literally just to bring bigger players to the table so that way we can have a conversation to make sure that the IP and the characters are handled in a way that's beneficial for like the community as a whole. And we see our role as kind of the like protectors of that, of that like being. So yeah, that's how we think about commercial rights, is trying to be like so liberal, right? Someone's making Christmas ornaments with their wizards. And if you can make $950,000 with your wizards as Christmas ornaments, that's like yours. You don't owe anything contractually to to the creators or to the community necessarily. But then if you kind of go over that cap, which of course any sort of big player would have to do like a significant game or show or something like that, then that just brings them to the negotiating table. So that's how we kind of think about balancing the community interest as well as like being able to tell stories, which I think most of our community wants.
Yeah, if I could just add on to that, one thing Dota had mentioned in that was this idea around maybe we write a story about your wizard that contradicts your ideas about who your wizard is. And this it's still something of a mystery to me how this gets reconciled, but I will say so far it's worked out. The thing to know, like, first of all, this whole thing is really just an experiment. I think I know how it's going to go, but who knows? So, like, for example, we did that storyboard a few days ago, and the storyboard featured a Tengu wizard who is a pyromancer. He was going insane in the story. He was setting a forest on fire, and then he eventually got calmed down by another wizard. Now, when I wrote that story and before I published it, I was wondering, okay, is the owner of this Tingo wizard going to be upset that we portrayed this wizard in this sort of light? Um, to my delight, the owner of that wizard just said, "Hey, that's my wizard," and it seemed to be a very excited reaction. I think they were happy about it. Um, I'm hoping that that is the sort of reactions we get going forward. But that's sort of what the Book of Lore is about. So we can crowdsource more of these wizards' identities. But at the same time, I would say, like, if you want to get involved in Forgotten Runes Wizards cult, just be aware that, like, these sorts of things could happen. We could write your wizard in a way that contradicts what you initially thought. I think the remedy to that, if you're like super upset about it, is like, whatever story we tell, it's only a moment in time. You can totally redeem your wizard at a later point in time. So this Tengu wizard, even though he went crazy and burned a forest in this particular story the other day, maybe his next story arc is he becomes a conservationist and he grows trees. So I think there's room for like just a huge breadth of lore and history around every individual wizard.
Just on the same page to a certain extent there. What do you think, like, as people sort of develop their own lore and art around their wizard, how do you feel about people minting NFTs of their derivative art and sort of bundling it with their wizard?
Love it.
We love it.
Yep. Love it. Encourage it.
Absolutely. Right on. I've seen that a couple times. I think maybe was it Tad that had done a couple animations that he's sort of sold as NFTs. I love the idea. I haven't figured it out myself yet, but
yeah, no, we want to encourage that. And I mean, like we said earlier, the Book of Lore is sort of like the acknowledgement of that. Like, when you attach lore to your wizard, you're essentially minting the lore itself and attaching it in the Book of Lore. So yeah, anything you want to mint, any derivative artwork you want to mint, please, by all means, go for it.
I mean, one kind of question I have regarding that is, we're seeing a lot of like derivative projects, right? I mean, how would you guys, essentially, if there's another kind of Wizards project that is very like basically a knockoff of, your project, what would you guys do?
It depends. So, for example, we've been in talks with a project who has this idea. Well, I don't want to maybe I don't reveal his idea. There's someone who has talk of an idea that I think is really interesting. That's a derivative work, and it's like kind of in good faith, and it's interesting. And, maybe it sort of uses some of our art as an input, but what comes out on the other side is unique, and that's like fine. There's, what is it, funks, right? Where it's like all of the punks, instead of facing like the right, they're facing left or something. So I think like if someone made like Fizzards, where it's like all like forgotten wizards, right? And it's like the PH or something. I think it's dumb, but I don't know that I'm necessarily going to go to OpenSea, I mean, whatever, reserve rights or whatever. But like, I don't know that I would go to OpenSea and be like, oh, you got to take this down. Because like we might do that if, for example, people were scamming people and saying like, oh, this is a fake collection and I got tricked and I lost a bunch of money, and it's becoming a real problem, right? Then maybe there is like a case where we say, yeah, you have to kind of ask OpenSea to protect your community because they don't understand that they're not getting a really good deal on a Forgotten Runes wizard. They're being tricked into buying another wizard. Then I think in that case, we've reported scam, early on, people did like, they re-uploaded all the artwork and they'd bundle one real runes wizard with a bunch of fakes and scam some money. I think we reported that because it was like exactly 1-1. But if somebody made like baby wizards, like go for it. Like I would love that. Like if someone made like wizard props and it's just like a different set of items, like please, if someone made, whatever, like, like pick your derivative, right? Like when you look at the punks derivatives, right? You look at GAN punks, you look at punk props, you look at, whatever, like aesthetic punks. Yeah. Like Do those devalue punks? No, these are NFTs. This isn't old value world. Those callbacks reinforce punks as a cultural icon. And so I think we say bring on the reinforcement, like bring on establishing Forgotten Runes as a cultural icon. If you want to make baby wizards, like we'll tweet about it.
I, for one, would love to see the GAN wizards. I just think all the GAN stuff is super cool.
Cool. Pat, did you have any more questions or?
I know you've mentioned sort of, we can always kind of get deeper into the contract and stuff like that. If you wanted to speak a little bit more about how you sort of made that work and were able to jam as much content as you were into that standard.
Sure. Yeah. So maybe this gets a bit technical, but I'll talk a little bit about it. So the way that we're able to fit the wizards on chain is we use what's basically a trick, and it was a trick taught to me by Owen from Xmons. And the idea is, as folks tend to know, the storage on Ethereum is quite expensive. When you set something, there are different operations. You pay gas for those operations on Ethereum, and certain operations are more expensive than others. Storing data is the most expensive operation, more or less. Maybe it's not like technically the most, but it's like very expensive. And so how do you deal with that? So one of the things that you can take advantage of is the fact that every transaction is also recorded. And so that it's like being in court, for example, and every time you say something in court, it gets added to the record by the transcriptionist. And so if you just say something in court, that gets put on the record. And similarly, if you just say something in a transaction in Ethereum, that gets added to the record. And so the programmers in the audience maybe will look at our contract and they'll say, hey, I looked at the store image function and it was an empty function. And that's right. And it's because when you call that function, you actually call that function with the arguments, and it's within those arguments that we store the data. And because you can go and look up every transaction that ever happened, that's where we're using for storage. So I can talk about that, and I can talk about the drawbacks. How we actually do this is in two parts. One is we've encoded all of the parts because it's pixel art. We also used a very limited palette of colors. So Elf was really deliberate to have, I believe, I don't know the exact number. I think it's around 217 colors in the entire collection. We specifically used only those colors for all the shading. And conveniently, that number fits you in 256, which means you can fit every, basically all of those, you can fit the color encoding in one byte. So for the idea is it's like 256 bits. So all that to say is that gets you a very small encoding of these colors versus if you've used sort of a rich photograph, which would be a much more denser encoding. Like every color needs more bits to be represented, but because we used a limited palette, you can compress that more. So not only do we compress all of the parts into one image, when you look at a wizard, we've actually upsized those images to usually 400 by 400 pixels. The source images are actually only 50 pixels by 50 pixels. But if you look at them in their natural size, they're quite tiny. And so you're able to pack all of the parts of all the wizards in one big image, in a big grid, and it uses this very limited color palette. So we were actually able to fit the entire the images that represent the entire collection into one Ethereum transaction. It's a very, very small bit of data. What's actually is more data, which is the decoding part, which is to say, well, how do I take that image and recreate it? And so what we basically have is a list of 10,000 items where we say, oh, this wizard has, head number 4 and body number 17 and familiar number 342. And you can imagine a set of those 6 things, right? So it's body, head, familiar, rune, background, and prop. Those 6 things basically become 6 numbers. So we have 10,000 times 6 numbers. And and then we basically pack those together in a clever way and put it into those transactions. So this is a very technical explanation. If you're interested in the details, we also encoded the script to decode this encoding. We also stored that on chain. We have the decoder crystal, which you can find in our OpenSea profile, and you can look at the decoder crystal to find the code, which will teach you how to recreate the entire collection on your local computer. And there's a gist that I've got on my Twitter that will give the step-by-step instructions. So hopefully that's not too much like boring detail of like technical details, but that's kind of how it works.
I'll just say that I understood very little of what Dota was saying, but I do know this. Number one, he made a epic Twitter thread maybe like a month ago that was just like how to launch a successful NFT project. And that thread has just been referenced by so many people I've seen all over Twitter, like wanting to know how to do it. And then, yeah, Dota also just constantly gets compliments on our contract. So, one thing I would say about it is like Dota and I work together really well. Just to bring it back to the front of this whole conversation, Dota has like everything that I don't have, and I feel like I have everything that he doesn't have. And like during the production of this whole project, it was so beautiful because we got into this just amazing flow state where we were just making decisions on our own, not running it by each other, and yet trusting one another to just do the right thing. And so, a team behind a project it's just invaluable. It's immeasurable how valuable that is. You can have an amazing idea, but if you don't have the team to pull it off, the idea is not going to execute. So, yeah.
Yeah, from my initial kind of research of before I even bought a wizard, I spent like a good week or so hanging out in the Discord, and that was the thing that was sort of immediately clear to me versus a lot of the other projects that I've been researching is that a lot of people have a lot of thoughts of what they want to do, and they have big roadmaps and things like that. But to actually have the team behind it that are dedicated to making that come to life is the difference maker there.
Absolutely. Yep.
Cool. I think that was it. That's all in mind.
Yeah, that was great, guys.
Great.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. It was a lot of fun.
So